Hello, hello, hello. Hope we are well. Welcome to Mental Health Warriors, of course. My name's Adam, and we are back with another installment of Warriors of Attraction. And tonight, we have got a fantastic guest who shared her story with me over email. And obviously, we was talking about a title we could come up with because she didn't have a clue, I didn't have a clue, and all I said was I read her first paragraph of her story, which I highly recommend, which we will be getting into, and the topic is the faces of many identities. So if this resonates with you, please tune in and please share this all. We are live, and there could be some swearing, I don't know. But this is how it is. We always express how we feel. But first, Andrea isn't going to be with us tonight. She's got some family commitments going on or personal issues. I don't know. So hope she's well and hope she's back next week. So we have got Rachel Chandler. No, she's probably not related to Chandler Bing from Friends, but who knows? So I'm going to bring her on and please share this all. Hello, Rebecca.
Hey, Rebecca. Yes. Good. Yes.
Yes. So welcome, of course. And no, I know you're not related to Chandler Bing from Friends.
Not today. Not today.
Not
Maybe
today.
tomorrow. You never know. You never know.
Hey, yeah. Well, we're all connected in some way, though, aren't we?
Yeah, I have to say two things about that. I've never watched an episode of Friends, so I know who that character is, but I don't relate. And if I were to pick a character from Friends, it would have been Phoebe, I think.
All right. Okay.
So that's my feelings about Friends, but I probably just made some enemies. But yeah,
It's probably with the blonde hair and the glasses. That's probably I don't know.
oh, maybe. Yeah,
I don't know. Who knows?
Inner...
Anyway, right. Face of many identities. Now, I bet you're thinking, where did that come from? That name, which I'm thinking because we all have all these different identities inside us, and it's which one actually comes out the most, which we allow that. So, I want to get started with obviously who is Rebecca Chandler? Like before she became an author, speaker, who is she?
Wow, before all that. So just a bit about me. I grew up in a really small town in Southern California, up in the mountains. Gorgeous, amazing place called Lake Arrowhead. And from a very lower middle class family. My dad was a fireman. My mom was doing odd jobs and staying home with us. So life was pretty simple, but wonderful. I mean, I had an older brother and sister, and unfortunately, when I was 5 years old, I started being assaulted, and that continued until I was 13 by my maternal grandfather. And I survived that. I got older. I went into therapy for the first time when I was 20, and then life kind of started rolling out, and I started working in advertising, and I became a producer, and I moved throughout the country, and then I moved overseas. So who is Rebecca Chandler? I think sometimes I want to say I'm a survivor, but then I'm getting really tired of saying I'm a survivor because I get tired of surviving. And I just kind of wrote a blog post about, can I stop being a survivor soon? I'd like to stop, that. And so I don't know. I'm someone that's still trying to figure out who I am, I suppose. And having moved around the world and lived around and worked around the world, and I'm back in the States now, and I self-published a couple of books this year, but I think it's a great question to ask me who I am, because I obviously can't answer it simply.
No, no.
So,
No, of course. And that's exactly as it is, because nobody actually really knows who we really are until
not
we
really.
look on the inner self. And you're absolutely right. It's like, how much do we have to keep surviving? Because to me, I'm surviving every single day because I
Yeah.
fall asleep. Yeah, yeah. Obviously, we hit these shit times sometimes, and part of us thinking, do I have to wake up tomorrow? But then when it comes to that next morning, you wake up, you realize, yeah, I'm grateful here for actually being here.
And I think that's really interesting, because there's a lot of conversation around gratitude all the time, right? And I meditate every morning, and gratitude's the first place I start my meditation.
Yeah.
But I'll be really honest, there are days, not as many now as before, but that I'm not particularly grateful.
Right.
I do wake up in my anger some days. I've had kind of a rough week. So sometimes gratitude is pushed aside, and I'm in my feelings. My feeling isn't gratitude. My feeling is anger or resentment or sadness. And I don't linger there, but I certainly let myself feel it when it
Mm.
happens. I
Yeah.
don't, yeah.
Yeah, and what do you do to obviously manifest when you wake up in this anger day? What do you do to manifest besides meditation, as you say, into getting from the bad into the good?
So I've been through a lot of therapy, and I
Yeah.
started when I was 20, then I was back in it when I was 30, and that was traditional talk therapy. I've also done EMDR work, past life work, group therapy, lots of stuff. And then I've really embraced somatic work, which has been the most profound and the most cathartic of all of those modalities. And every one of those therapeutic pursuits has given me a tool
Okay.
and an enormous amount of self-awareness. So when I wake up and my mood is off, I'm able to stop what I'm doing, which is really important to me. You have to stop, and you have to acknowledge I'm not the best version of myself this morning. This is what I do. And then I just stop long enough to identify what's the source of this? What is actually creating, what's the trigger for it? And then, understanding that it was a conversation this week that put me in a bad space, and understanding that my anger, resentment, sadness, fear, although they're very much healed in a lot of ways, my mind will tap into them whenever it feels uncomfortable. And I
Yeah.
just have to recognize, you know what, this made me uncomfortable. I was pissed off, whatever it was. It's okay to be pissed off.
Yeah.
And then it's okay, and do some breathing and just take a minute to go, it's all right. And then remind myself that I'm safe, that I'm 53, and that I don't want to give this stuff too much power. And then I get on with my day, and it doesn't mean that I'm not a little edgy the rest of the day. It just means that I'm keeping things in perspective more than I used to.
Yeah. Absolutely. And obviously, welcome everyone. I know we've got Robert Brookie all the way from Canada.
Hi.
He's actually put a really good comment, well, a few of them, but here's just one of them. Acknowledging your feelings is a good thing to do the way you can set them free.
Yeah, I I think feelings are a reflection of some wounds. For me, they are. My anger is a reflection of a very deep wound that I'm healing, and I continue to heal. My sadness, my fear. So I don't know that I'm able to set anything free necessarily, but I am able to minimize and kind of, I believe in accepting things, accepting it, letting it flow out of me. I don't push back on it. I just accept my anger. I accept my sadness. And I think
Yeah.
If that's what you mean by setting it free, then I agree with that. Like the more you accept it, the quicker it is to set it free.
Yeah, absolutely, and obviously we've have got a mental health warriors group, and the amazing obviously colleague of mine Terry, she uploads these brilliant posts on a daily basis, and I've just pulled it up here, and it actually connects with this, and I want to share it. It's called "Happiness Can Be Found Even in the Darkest of Times If One Only Remembers to Turn on the Light."
That's from Harry Potter. That's a direct
Is
Dumbledore
it?
quote. That's a 100% Dumbledore quote. I love it. I love Harry Potter. So
I did not know that.
yeah,
And I've seen Harry Potter.
yeah, but maybe you haven't seen it as much as I have, and I read all the books.
Oh, you're not an addict, are you?
I'm a little I might be a little dedicated to Harry Potter, but I don't like, not in a scary way, but just in, I love the story, you know?
Ah.
Yeah, I like
good. Oh, here we go.
I like good triumphing over evil, obviously from my own story, right? Where I had to triumph over evil. I love Star Wars for the same reason. I love those.
Oh, I don't like Star Wars.
See, I'm not sure we can be friends if you actually say that out loud. Like I just I'm a little worried
upset now.
like Star Wars.
No, I'm just one of these that basically I tried watching Star Wars.
What?
No, I tried watching it. Literally the first half an hour, I watched the first half an hour of the first one, then that's it. I fell asleep.
So I don't know how old you are. I'm 53. And so I remember
I'm 32.
Okay. So when episode 4 came out, I'll say it that way, the first Star Wars movie we ever saw, I remember wearing my pajamas to the shopping mall, which was an hour away, standing in line, which was sold out, and going to see this thing called science fiction, which was, apart from Star Trek, was so new and the storytelling was so next level. And I think that for my generation, we all got hooked. But for your generation, you're used to this stuff, right? And so maybe you didn't grow up on Star Trek and Star Wars blowing your mind and Battlestar Galactica.
I was more Star Trek.
See, like I can appreciate the Trekkiness. Although I have to say something, and it's going to be very controversial today. I am a Picard fan. I am not the original Captain Kirk fan, William Shatner. I respect William Shatner, but I'm a Picard fan. So
anyway, back to Identities. Back to Identities.
Sorry, back to mental health. Yeah, let's do it.
Well, it's not just mental health, though, is it? But okay, what's the difference between communicating with your self-identity and masking?
I don't know that I know the answer to that question. Is masking when I kind of pretend it doesn't exist, or
no? Masking is you're pretending that you're okay, but really you're destroyed inside.
Well, I spent.
Yes.
So I would say that from the age of 5 to the age of 52, I spent 90% of my life masking.
Okay.
And in the past year, I've spent more time being my authentic self. So I don't wake up masking anymore very often. I don't live my life that way anymore. And it's interesting that because I've started to talk about my abuse more, I wrote a book about it, I'm on podcasts and stuff like that. I think it's difficult for people who've known me for a very long time to adjust to who I am now versus who I was for decades. And I think that's the biggest adjustment, is not so much for me, it's for the people around me.
Absolutely. Yeah, because when we're vulnerable and we're literally, I'm not going to say cry out for help, but it's asking for that help. That's when people's true colours start to come to surface, if that makes sense.
It does. I think what happened to me is that, I began to be sexually assaulted when I was 5, and it ended when I was 13. And as a result of that experience, I became a hyper resilient person.
Right.
And I became really good at solving things very quickly, very efficiently, which makes me a really good producer, which is what my other full-time job is, being an exec producer. And because I'm so hyper resilient and hyper effective and always able to kind of get through things and do all that stuff, what I find is that as I'm now been through an enormous bit of healing, I'm not that version of myself anymore.
No.
And what I find really interesting is that people don't quite know how to accept me as a vulnerable person, because I haven't expressed vulnerability most of my life. Vulnerability was how I got hurt. That's what happened. So now when I'm trying to live a more authentic, vulnerable, balanced self and not this hyper vigilant person and hyper resilient, it's new for me and it's really new for the people around me. And so people have gotten used to me never needing help. People have gotten used to me figuring things out. I can go to a shoot in Libya tomorrow and figure it out. I can move to Kuala Lumpur tomorrow and figure it out. And now that I'm not that version of myself and I want to be vulnerable and I'm asking for help and I'm asking for softness from others, I find that people genuinely don't know how to receive me. They don't know what to do with me.
No, I'm pretty much the same level as you, Rebecca. I really am, because I'm not the type of person to ask for help either. I'm not, but when I do ask for help, some people do shut me down. Probably because I'm male. I don't know, because I know there's a stigma surrounding men and vulnerability.
Maybe. I think there's a stigma with people being vulnerable. I think that, I don't know necessarily about, British society, but certainly in American society, being vulnerable isn't celebrated, right? Especially in America, you're expected to pull up your socks and get on with it. I mean, our entire social framework, there's not a lot of softness in it.
No.
So if you're poor, if you're sick, if you are having a problem, there's not a network for you to tap into like there is in some other places in the world. So softness and vulnerability is not part of our culture at all.
No, it's not.
So, I think it's particularly brutal in America.
Okay. Well, obviously, I can't speak for America because I've never been there. But I'd love to. But even though I've been invited by God knows how many people. But big one. Why do we choose? Because obviously everything's a choice. Why do we choose to be all these identities just to please people? Why I'm saying that is because growing up in school when I was being abused and bullied, I was in this group of people and there was about 10 of us. And I had 10 identities, 10 masks on all at the same time. And it burned me out because I'm just trying to show all these personalities. I didn't know my own identity at that time. I didn't. So what do we do? Like, why do we do it?
I think for me, the fundamental building blocks of self-confidence and trust were never properly established, because as a child, you build trust from, I guess, age like 4 to 7. That's where the fundamentals are established. So I never had those building blocks for trust. So I never learned how to trust an environment, but more importantly, I never learned how to trust myself, which kind of speaks to self-love, right? That was not something I was taught, and it certainly wasn't something I could hang on to while I was being assaulted. So I think that a lot of abuse survivors are chameleons. because we need to immediately shape shift to try to fit in so
Yeah,
that we're not noticed so much. Because when you're noticed, you're a target, right? I'm a target if
absolutely.
people pay
Yeah.
attention to me. So I don't want people to pay attention to me. So I'm going to I played sports. I was a student government. I was a straight A student. So I held on to all of those groups and identities so I could fit in as much as possible so that I didn't actually stand out, oddly enough. And I think that's why I did it, was to stay safe. My most of my life I was making choices around, is that going to make me safe? You know?
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Barriers are always up.
Yeah.
Like obviously, lately my barriers are up because of the fear of rejection or
Right.
fear of judgment.
Yeah.
And are they up now? Yes, they are. But that's my choice because I'm, as you say, there to protect me. Because how can I protect anyone when I'm being attacked? So
Yeah.
this is why I protect me first. Um.
But it's that whole
So
it's
what's
that
that?
idea of being attacked, isn't it? It's how do you so I have to relearn or learn new or whatever you describe it. I've had to learn to like not hold my breath when I meet new people.
Right.
And because I used to not hold my breath when I walk into a room. Um, Not immediately kind of think in catastrophic terms when I'm going to go out on a date, right? So I've
Right.
had to, I don't know about you, but I've had to relearn as an adult that the violence that I was existing in as a child, actually, A, it's over, and B, I'm in control now of the environments I put myself in,
Yeah.
and that kind of violence is not going to exist again. So it's having to learn to convince myself and trust myself that I'm making adult choices now, and
Yeah.
I'm in control of the environment now.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with you. It is because obviously I learned that from listening to I think it was Les Brown,
Mm.
where obviously you can't keep focused on the past because you're right now in the present, and if you keep focused on the past, that's going to affect you for moving forward. And like obviously, when if you're stuck in the past, then you're stuck in adversity and you're not gaining that resilience to move forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think for in my journey, I wasn't necessarily stuck in the past, but I was certainly making choices through a traumatized lens, if that's stuck in the past, if that's what that means.
Yeah.
So what I've had to do through somatic work largely is I had to identify my personalities. They were called 5, 6, 7, and 13. I identified them early in life. I had to get to know them through my somatic sessions and these are deep meditations you go into. And I had to actually talk to them one to one. I had to convince them that I was a grown up person. I had to convince them that the violence was over and that I was safe and that it was time to integrate and then release. So I don't know that I was necessarily stuck in my past as so much as I was living my life and every single decision through a very traumatized, kind of shattered lens, and to be able to
Mm.
clean that lens up and make it a single perspective and a single point of view. I had to reconcile my fragmented pieces, my personalities. And I think that a
Yeah.
lot of people, when they've gone through trauma, they don't know that the past versions of themselves don't know the violence is over. So my
Yeah.
present self isn't stuck in the past, but pieces of me are. So if you were bullied in elementary school or junior high or high school, there's a 13-year-old version of yourself out there somewhere you need to connect with, talk
Yeah.
to, reconcile with, and reassure so that a piece of you is no longer stuck at 13. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Well, at the minute, I'm actually dealing with. I'm not dealing with my 13-year-old self. I'm actually dealing with my 3-year-old self because
Wow.
that
Yeah.
that is when the violence actually started.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is when I was 3, and that's what I'm currently dealing with at present.
Yeah.
Am I finding it easy? No, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not finding it easy. I do get triggered from time to time, but it's all about how we're responding to these situations. And when I get triggered, automatically, like I'm not a psychologist, but I'm studying to become one. Um, I'm always implementing reverse psychology on myself and reflective practice. So that's what it is.
Yeah. And I think I know that when I went through my somatic experiences in Kenya and in Singapore and in the States, it was over like 4 years this happened. When I first spoke to 5 and then 7, 6, and then 7 and 13, I knew that they were the source of really powerful triggers. 5 was my
Yeah.
fear. That was the first time I was assaulted. 6 was my shame. Shame is very complicated. 7 was my sadness. In addition to being assaulted, my parents got divorced around that time. And then 13 was my anger. I was 13 when I fought my grandpa off and ended the violence.
Right.
So but I had to give them space, and I had multiple conversations with each inside a somatic experience so that I could listen to them and convince them that it's safe. But I couldn't what I did at one point though was I kind of skipped over some of their feelings. And like a 7 was angry, but I never let her express her anger. I only let her express her sadness. And in one part of my book, I write about the fact that when I went back to 7 and said, "Why are you hanging on to this?" She's like, "You haven't given me a chance to feel anger. You've only given me a chance to feel sadness."
Mm.
Okay, well, let's feel your anger now. Because if I don't fully flush out those remnants, then they just keep kind of flowing back through me, right?
They
So
do.
I
They
I
keep
applaud you.
recurring. Yeah.
Yeah, I applaud you on the work with your 3-year-old self because it's difficult to have the patience to realize you're talking to a child stuck in time, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It is difficult. Like obviously, I haven't even got to my teenage years yet. I'm actually stuck on that age because that's when it all started. And do I ask myself questions over and over? Yes, I do. Because I've got things like the abuse was my fault, which I know it's not. It wasn't my fault. Me being put on a child protection plan from social services or
Mm,
child services, I was brainwashed to believe that was my fault as well, which no, it wasn't.
yeah, no.
I'm noticing that it wasn't my fault.
And I've studied shame quite a bit in the past year. I was really unaware of how pernicious shame was until I
Yeah,
was writing my book and I started to study shame as a part of it. And I see shame as more of a parasite, and it
right.
kind of latches on to, for me, my shame latched on to my 6-year-old self,
Okay.
and it fed off of her. And then when I released 6, shame redirected its energy to me. And I actually had a somatic session where I confronted shame inside this visualization and was like, what is your problem? Why are you hurting me? And shame said, "Well, I'm hurt, so I have to share it with you." And then I said, "Well, why are you ashamed?" Because I know it's not my fault that my grandfather was a pedophile. That's not confusing for me. It never
Mm.
has been. And she took me back into some very particular moments where I was being assaulted, and she actually shared this fear of being heard or seen. And that's where my shame took root. So it wasn't shame from the point of view where I thought it was my fault. My shame was given a life when she thought that people saw me or heard me being sexually assaulted, and she was embarrassed.
Right.
And when I finally figured that out, like that's what my shame is about. then I just reassured her that nobody heard us, nobody saw us. There's no reason for shame here. And I have to say, I no longer hear shame in my head anymore. Very
No.
rarely now. But it's a lot of deep, difficult work to talk to these energetic sources and say, why are you here? What do you need? Right?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions on that. So first one is, I agree, it's no longer shame. Would you say it's more anger and frustration rather than shame coming out? Because I've noticed, and a lot of people picked up on it, where when we're going at people, if they're like coming at us, provoking us, it's not us responding. It's our trauma that's responding.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's how do we deal with that? Because straight away the only words that come from to me is self-defense.
The source of my anger that was the first reaction I had to just about everything for most of my adult life was my identity that I called 13. When I was 13 years old, my grandfather tried to sexually assault me and I fought him off. And that was the end of it. And that gave birth to 13 and all of the anger I had.
Yeah.
And so what I had to do, and it was the most complicated part of reconciling my personalities, was I had to talk to 13. And keep in mind, she's 13. She's a pissed off teenager. And she's not convinced that I can help her at all. And she was the most complicated. And I had to really spend time with her, tell her I love her. She was highly protective of 5, 6, and 7. She didn't trust me to protect them. So I had to work a lot with her in doing that. And eventually I had to get kind of stroppy with her and say, you know what? Stop it. I am not an angry person, and I'm no longer interested in your anger. You've expressed it. We've talked about it. We've flushed it out. You need to stop. And eventually I figured out that really she just wanted to be loved. So instead of trying to box with her and trying to, go back and forth with her, I started to tell her how much I loved her. And it took a while to break through those layers of her trusting love and understanding I loved her and believing me I loved her. But when I finally did, I finally reconciled all my personalities and I eventually released them. I no longer have that angry first pass at everything because I've reconciled it and I've released it. So it doesn't mean I don't get pissed off. I do, right? I'm always
we all do. We all do.
But I don't live through an angry lens anymore, right? I
Yeah.
have patience,
Yeah, which I think from time to time, if we like grab a pillow and we scream it into it or we punch it and stuff like that, go for it.
Yeah,
because because when you're letting it out, you're letting go of that unwanted energy and you're letting go of that trauma in the right way.
Yeah, but just
and it is helping to get pissed off from time to time.
Oh, for sure. Like I had a difficult week this week, and I'm really angry with my mom this week.
Okay.
And so I have these kinds of really strong conversations in my head. That's the equivalent of me shouting into a pillow. And then I start to clean things and organize things because that helps me. But what's important for me now is to just self-regulate, to acknowledge I'm pissed off. It's okay to be pissed off. But to understand that it's a quick phase, it's not who I am day to day. I used to just be an angry person. I'm not an angry person now. I have flashes of anger. It's very different.
Absolutely. So yeah, and thanks for this comment, Christopher Rausch. You're awesome, saying excellent conversation because it is. So the next one is, what if you know someone that's wanting to move on from their trauma and wanting to be happy, but they're stuck in that trauma and they're trying every method from medication, from meditation, from seeing therapists, all that, and they're still stuck. What do you do?
That's such a really important question. I just love that question because I think that in my own experience, talk therapy doesn't actually get to the source of how you're feeling. Talk therapy is very event based. You talk about how you feel, you talk about what happened to you. In my opinion, some of those modalities very helpful, and I think that healing is a multi-layered approach. But if you find yourself stuck in a rut because you've been to therapy for 4 years, I hear this a lot. I've been in therapy for 4 years and I'm still angry, or I'm still sad, or I'm still a compulsive shopper, I'm still a compulsive eater, I still have self-harm thoughts, like all this stuff is still happening. In my opinion, that's because you haven't found a modality that actually addresses the source of your traumatized energy. And in my opinion, it's all energy. And in my opinion, it's somatic work. Somatic work starts where the trauma starts. So, the trauma starts in your flesh, let's say. And when it starts in your flesh, it immediately sends a signal to your mind, something really bad is happening here. Now, your flesh has one version of the truth. It only has the truth. It can't manipulate the information and it can't change it. If you were in a traffic accident and you had a broken arm, your flesh can only tell you, I have a broken arm. Your mind can say, well, it was broken, but it wasn't that bad. Your mind does other things with it. And I think in somatic work, what you do is you go back to the flesh, acknowledge where the trauma started, and then you get the mind to come back into agreement with the truth. And in that process, when your mind and your body are in alignment once again, then you can actually start to release this energy that is misdirected, which is really what trauma is. It's just completely misdirected energy. And I think that's the powerful part of really strong somatic work or energy work, is you're finally addressing your trauma at the root, and you will eventually remove it from the root. Whereas a lot of other modalities, very helpful, very important, but they don't go to the source.
No.
And I think that's why, is if you don't, energy keeps flowing. And if you don't find the source of it and cut it out at the source, it keeps flowing. So you might feel good after talk therapy for a year, 6 months, 5 years, but that energy, because you didn't get it out at the root, it will cycle back. You will fall back into bad patterns. You will keep experiencing your trauma because you never went to the source.
Absolutely, yeah. It is. It is absolutely, and as Christopher's put, it is root over symptoms.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the symptoms are literally in your mind, and they're making you believe that there was something wrong with you instead of wrong with the situation.
Yeah, yeah. And you're and if you don't get the tools together to recognize when that energy is coming back in, like I didn't for a very long time. So I didn't think about my abuse or anything else about it. I was an angry person, but for years. But then I noticed that my compulsive behaviors were coming back at me. And some shame was coming back. It was like, why does this keep cycling through? Because I never took the time to cut it out at the root and to also accept that energy, manipulate it myself, and release it. I didn't know how to do that until recently. So
congrats on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of work, isn't it? It's just it never, healing doesn't stop. It just evolves,
It is. So let's talk about your books.
Sure.
Yeah, so obviously with all this trauma you've gone through, or shall I say experience, what inspired you to say, instead of having it to me, I want it to the world, and I want it in writing?
I've always enjoyed writing, even as a kid. So I've written off and on, but I never expected to write a book. And then in 2017, when I had a surgery in Dubai that went terribly wrong, and I had medical trauma coming out of that surgery. And my healer in Kenya, who I was talking to because I was going through a major breakdown, she's like, you need to use your creativity to get to deal with this. She's like, how are you creative? I'm like, well, I like to write. I like storytelling. That's why I'm a producer. She's like, okay, well, you need to write some things. You need to start using what works for you to get it out. If it's painting, if it's writing, whatever it is. So I decided to start writing about what was happening to me at the time, which was medical trauma. And I wrote 30,000 words in a couple of days. It was it was a lot. But that beginning of that story and that medical trauma was clearly connected to my sexual abuse as a child. Yeah. And so it just kept flowing from there. And then a year ago, maybe because I was back in America, maybe because I was older, I don't know exactly what convinced me to go, you know what? I'm going to write this book and I'm going to tell my story. And maybe it was because of Me Too and the empowerment of it and giving people voices, kind of like this perfect storm of opportunity and time. And I thought, I'm going to write it for me first. And if it happens to touch other people's lives, that's kind of a huge gift. But it really, I wrote it for me because I never felt like I had a voice. As a kid, I didn't have a voice. When I told my family about my abuse when I was 20, I wasn't heard. I'll say it that way.
I know.
And so this was an opportunity to finally be heard. And it felt really good. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I commend you for actually doing this because this is why we create this platform, is so we can give people like yourself that opportunity to be heard, because this is what our mission is to get these little voices and to make one big voice. And that's what we do.
Every survivor should be able to feel proud of themselves and talk freely. And what's interesting is I just wrote in a blog post about the fact that, my book is not an easy read. My book is about surviving childhood sexual assault and healing and finding joy. So there is joy at the end, but it's a bit of a tough read at times. And I think what's interesting is that I've gotten feedback from people close to me that it was too difficult for them to read. And I thought, first I was angry. And then I thought, well, imagine if you can't handle reading about it. Imagine what it was like to go through it.
Exactly.
So if I make you uncomfortable, then you should probably work on the bits of you that I'm making uncomfortable.
Exactly. Yeah, because life's about stepping out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, and my story should make you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it's okay to be uncomfortable. And I just think that it's interesting. I've had people ask me when I'm going to stop talking about it. And I find that
why should you stop?
It's whether or not I stop or it evolves or expands or contracts or whatever happens to it. It's my story. So, I feel you right now.
Well, you know what? This is what pisses me off about people. Is because
together.
No, this is what pisses me off, is because I've come to a solution and people need to have the same conclusion on this, is we're going to die one day. It doesn't matter when, we are going to die one day.
Yes.
But our stories won't.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting is that I wrote this book. It's a memoir. It's obviously a bit of a complicated read, but I do stand by the book, and I'm happy that I wrote it. I'm also now writing a book about expat life, and I've been to over 100 countries. And so I find more and more people saying, well, your memoir, that's really cool, but when are you going to write your next book about travel? So I find that people want me to skip over my journey. And I have to remind people, no, I'm walking through it. I'm not skipping over anything. So if you want the good parts, you're going to have to walk with me through the difficult parts.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's how it is. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. So, final one. Where can people find you?
I have a website, RebeccaEChandler.com. Don't forget the E in the middle. And from there, you can find me on social media. You can buy my books. You can do the whole thing. So I'm pretty easy to find, as it turns out.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming on, Rebecca. You've been awesome as usual. Please don't just be a guest. Come back at any time. And next week, we're actually going off this topic and like carrying it on because we're heading off, not literally, but our guest is from Australia.
Love it.
So we've got someone from Australia. We've got Alan Stevens. He's a profile communication specialist. So yes, he can read people.
Love it.
And we're talking about how people create problems for themselves.
I love that. I love your show. What you're doing is you're sharing your gift, and you should really just really celebrate that. You're important. Thank you.
Yeah. But this episode is going to be at 9 o'clock UK next week.
Nice.
So it's an hour later. So there you go. Right. So yeah. Right. What am I doing here? Right. So please share this all, and we will see you next week. See you later.
Bye.